start out the presentation today to tell you a little bit how this presentation came about. I was previously here at Case, and the last meeting that I had with faculty here, more than a few faculty said that they had an issue, and the issue was with their content. And they were saying that they wished that they could do more in the classroom beside present their content, but that they realized that they needed to cover the material. And I think that through this presentation today, you'll sort of see that as a recurrent theme. So I just sort of wanted to paint a picture where this came from. Wendy Shapiro, my former supervisor here, who did the introduction, she said, well, Mace, this would be a great forum for you to present your classroom flip presentation. This has been in the works for about 10 years, and again, I'll give you the history and the background as we go through the presentation today. I've asked the guys in the back to give me some signals about time, so if they're doing things back there, that's what it is. Okay. I'm going to put you guys to work because I want this to be active. I want this to be sort of a mock active classroom. Before we start this, though, and you can still be thinking about the question up there, how many of you are faculty? Okay. And the rest of you are IT people, support staff, that sort of thing? Okay, good. All right, well, here's your task for right now. It's a 1-minute thought exercise. And what I'd like you to do is I would like you to identify a frustration you've had in your teaching or with your students' learning, okay? And we're going to go around a little bit, and I would like you to finish this sentence. If I could fix one thing in my classes, it would be. Okay, so take a minute. You can talk to your neighbors, or you can do it individually. So take a minute and think about that. All right, this was great. I'm going to cut it a little short, but I saw a lot of engagement here and a lot of active learning, which I'm very happy about. This is the bold sharing part of the presentation. So, what are some of the needs that you identified? Just anybody can start. We can freewheel. Yes, sir.
We talked about the fact that technology is actually prohibiting or inhibiting the teaching environment. For example, cell phones going off, third screens that are disrupting the flow of classroom teaching.
Okay. I don't know if anybody was at the, this is sort of an aside, was at the Cleveland Orchestra concert 2 weeks ago, where Yoshida, she directs from the piano and she does Mozart stuff. And she stopped the concert because somebody's phone went off. And it was amazing. So not just in the classroom, but some other ideas. Frustrations.
I work with students and teachers, so I said, you know, the frustration for me is to have students and teachers come prepared and eager to learn.
Okay.
And it's a big, big wish, but.
Very good. Other ideas? Yes, sir, in the back.
Piggybacking on that, the biggest wish that I have is that I could have my students to read before coming to class, which would enhance the interactions.
Okay.
And so being able to apply. If you could come having done some of the reading, then you can apply so much more.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
If we're talking about technology, the different levels of preparedness students come to you with. Some don't know how to turn on a computer, and others know how to have 4 screens going at once.
Okay. Any other ideas? Yes.
We talked briefly about the time it takes to set up a new program or design an experience, an educational experience, and see that it's going to run and get the links going. If there was some way to reduce that time load.
Okay. Let's take one more.
It would be nice if every classroom was equally equipped with technology. So some are not, I mean, obviously they're older, you know, and so sometimes the rooms are not, they don't have a wireless signal, or it's a weak signal, that kind of thing. It'd be nice if you could just count on every room being as good.
Okay. All right. Very good. I've been thinking about this, and a colleague of mine who I'll mention later on, we've been thinking about this for about 10 years now, as I said before. And we've actually given, this is sort of a workshop thing that takes place, it's a day-and-a-half workshop, so I'm trying to compress it in 45 minutes. So if I see hurried, you know why. But what we would do in the workshop is we would be taking all these comments down on flip charts that are around the room. And what we were able to do over the last 10 years is that we came up with pretty consistently 4 categories of common findings. And these categories are as follows: student motivation, unique instructional capabilities, support for new instructional approaches, and increased teacher productivity. And what's interesting about this is there are certain ones that always seem to surface no matter what group I talk to. And they surface now, and you're going to see which ones they are. So I'll talk about each one of these individually. I have to say, though, that my bias is towards student motivation. And let me tell you why. There is a movement out there to address every student's learning style. And I know that there are people who want to argue with me about this, and we can do this later on, and I would enjoy it. But I'm not necessarily convinced that there are learning styles. So what I'd like you to do is I would like you to convince me that there are. But more importantly, I think even if there are learning styles, I think what is much more important is student motivation. Let me give you an example. Most of us have gone through graduate school, and we have been taught many times against our, what we call our learning style. But we are always succeeding. And why is that? If somebody's teaching against your learning style, why did we continue to succeed in graduate school? It wasn't because of the learning style, was it? It was because we were motivated. People that go to graduate school are motivated to succeed. So I'm a real fan of this student motivation thing. You know, I saw some funny looks on some faces when I said I'm not convinced they're learning style. So I'm interested in talking to people after this about that. But, okay. So, student motivation. Here are some of the things that we've taken down over the last 10 years. And I think some people in here have mentioned these in one way, shape, or form. I need to capture the interest of my students. I want students to have a greater sense of control of their learning. and my students aren't prepared for class discussion because they haven't kept up with the textbook reading, and I think 2 people in here said that already. For the last 10 years, I always get that one. And I'm going to give you a solution to this problem later on in the presentation, so you'll never have to say that again. And it is a technology solution, all right? Okay. So the first category was student motivation. The next category is unique instructional capabilities. Remember that these are things that I've heard from faculty over the last 10 years. These are recurrent themes that I've heard. I need to be able to demonstrate processes. Here we're getting into more active learning rather than the passive thing of just sitting back and listening to a lecture. My students need access to extra resources to update or expand on what the text offers. And I would like students to track their progress in the course. So these are some recurrent themes that we've heard over the last 10 years. Support for new instructional approaches. I'd like to reduce the amount of time spent in class on lecturing without sacrificing coverage of the content. As I said right at the beginning, this was sort of the last theme that I heard in my last meeting with faculty here at Case. This is what they were saying right now. And I was saying, I've been addressing this problem for about 10 years. And that's why Wendy invited me to come and give this presentation. My students need opportunities for continuing discussion for peer learning. And here we're getting into the collaboration, we're getting into the social aspects of learning. Support for new instructional approaches. I'd like to help my students focus more on understanding and application rather than, will this be on the test? How many times have we heard that? I would like to give my students greater sense of responsibility for their learning. Who should be responsible for learning? Should it be the instructor, or should it be the student, or should it be sort of a balance that the students and the instructor have some responsibility for the learning in their class? Okay, and increased teacher productivity. I'd like to do more activity-based learning in class, but I have a lot of material I need to cover. And I'd like students to have more frequent grade updates. There's one thing about this coverage of the content, and I can understand it because, let's say, for example, I teach Chemistry 101, and you're my colleague, and I have to pass my students on to you into Chemistry 102. I want to make sure that I've covered the content because your expectation is you're going to get a group of students coming into your class that know certain facts, that know how to do certain things. But how do you do that? How do you cover that content and also do more active things in the classroom rather than just sort of the fact-by-fact sort of thing? Okay, so think about those categories that I just gave you and because it was almost word for word, for some of those things, you could probably directly map the things that you said into some of these categories that I just gave you. It makes it a little bit easier if you look at it that way. Okay, now, you've probably heard this as well. Faculty are encouraged to move from a teaching model to a learning model, but how do you do that in your class? In other words, how do you as a faculty member at an institution that emphasizes teaching move from the sage on the stage to a guide on the side? I'd like to comment a little bit about lecturing because some people think, because of this presentation, that I'm against lecturing. I'm not. But I think, again, there has to be a balance between lecturing and a balance between other things that you could do in a classroom. I took, in my PhD program, I waited to the end to take a class that was called The Philosophy of Education. because my background is in instructional technology and educational psychology. So all I wanted to read and all I wanted to know about was the research and the technology side of it. And I wasn't too interested in the philosophical things because I thought I knew everything in that area. I thought I know the philosophy of education. I have my own philosophy of education. So I put it off to the end and I thought, well, I'll struggle through this. And I walked into the classroom and there was a gray-haired man sitting up in the front. His name was George Harrison, not the Beatle, sort of unfortunately. And all he did was he lectured every class. He sat at the desk and lectured to us. But I have to say that it was probably the best class I've ever taken. He would get so into his lectures that he would cry. He would tell jokes. He would, you know, he was quite an actor. He based his philosophy of education on conversations he had at the pub with his mailman while they were drinking beer. And I know that that seems strange, but he made all the connections you want to make, and it was great. So as I go through, and I learned a lot from him, and every week I couldn't wait to get into his class because I wanted to find out what's he going to do in there, what's he going to tell us about. And so as I go through this, I don't want people to think, well, you know, Mace, he's against lecturing. I'm not. But again, what I want to say is I think that there needs to be a balance between lecturing. So I say things, how do you balance? How do you move some of the lecture out of the classroom so you can move other things into the classroom? So I just sort of wanted to precede some of the things I'm going to say with that. Remember, I'm saying that it was probably the best class I've ever taken, and it was nothing but straight lecture. Okay. We know a lot right now. If you look at the science of learning, we know a lot about it. And we're a lot closer to understanding how people learn. And these are some of the features that, that we're talking about now. We know that time after time, if you look at the research, you look at the literature, that active learning is much more effective than what's called passive learning. Okay, if you can get students to do things, I always use two objectives in things that I'm going to do. What do you want your students to know? What do you want your students to be able to do? And it's what do you want your students to be able to do that I feel is the most important or the most effective part. It has to be contextual. This is where we get into things. This is what Stacy Williams, who was just on the panel a little while ago, she was talking about transfer. And this is how we get transfer, because if you want a student to learn about something, they should learn in the context in which it's going to work. So it has to be contextual. The concept of engagement is really a simple concept. It's like the more you do things, the better you get at it. So if you can engage your students and they're out, it's the time on task thing. They do a much better job. Interactive. This goes hand in hand with the active versus passive sort of thing. I wish this was more interactive, but it can't be. But at least I put that little thing at the beginning. And social. We're really getting into this social thing anymore. The social aspects of learning. And when I talk about peer involvement, peer learning, learning from your peers, and the guide on the side, this is where I'm going with it. And today we're talking a lot about, in a lot of the presentations that you hear, they'll talk about social media and social learning. And this is an important aspect. 10 years ago when we started this, it wasn't so important. We really didn't think about it. Although we had our students work in groups, and we did see positive effects of that. Students are pretty good at teaching one another things, sometimes better than we are at teaching them things. Okay, so to address these needs, what we're trying to do here is open up the class time for active learning. And, but again, here's the theme again, but how do I do this and maintain the same level of coverage of the content? All right, So finally, we're here at the classroom flip model. I want to tell you a little bit about it. I met a colleague 10 years ago. His name's Wes Baker. He is a professor at Cedarville College, which is near Columbus. And he's the one that actually invented the classroom flip model. And here's how it got started. He said he was in class one day, and he's giving his lecture, and he stopped in the middle, and he said, this is ridiculous because I'm just repeating what's in the textbook, and I give the students all my lecture notes, and I give them all my PowerPoints. And he said, this is sort of degrading to the students because they can all read. Why am I doing this? So he told his students that he was going to give them all the content at that point of his class. And he said, you know, come back next time and we're going to do something different. And he said after he did that and he went back to his office, he realized that he had just given his course away. And he said, I needed to figure out, now what am I going to do? What am I going to do in my class? And that's how he came up with the classroom flip model. So keep that in mind as we go through as well. Okay? There are some goals of this model, and they are these. We want to find an approach that would make it possible for the faculty to move from sage to guide. In other words, from straight lecture in the class to be able to have activity in the class that the students would do to give them experience with active learning. It's sometimes hard to do when you have a large class. And that's the comment I always get about this. Well, that's fine if you have 15 students, but how do you do this if you have a class of 100 students or whatever? I went to an ELI, an Educause Learning Institute session. Has anybody here ever gone to one of those? They're excellent because they're really small. You do work in an active way. It's really a great experience. There's a lot of networking going on. And there was a professor there who taught physics. And the first thing he did was he put a slide up. It was a picture of his classroom. And he said, here was my classroom last year. And it was a picture of the theater seating. And students were reading the newspaper. And students were sleeping. And students were talking to one another, and it didn't seem like it was an effective way for him to teach. And he said, here's my classroom now. And what it was an open room, and it had round tables in it. And the students were all, they were all engaged, if you will, in the activity. I didn't see anybody reading a newspaper. I didn't see anybody sleeping. And he said, what I want to do is I want to simulate what I do with my students here with you. And we said, okay. And so we all had round tables. I think there were about, I don't know, maybe there were about 100 of us. And so he said, here's the first task. He said, open up the physics textbook to page 272. And we thought, oh, he's going to have us read the textbook. And he said, what's the thickness of the page? Well, I threw a softball there because there was a ruler there, and it's easy to figure out. So we could figure out what the thickness of the page was. So that's how we started out. The next activity was this. He gave us a curve on a piece of paper, a drawn curve on a piece of paper, and he gave us a sleeve of tennis balls. And he said, what I want you to do is I want you to figure out how do you make the tennis ball go through the curve without touching the edges? And he said, go for it. Well, that was really interesting. So what people did, some people took some of the paper and the materials that were there, and they built a wall around the curve. So, the tennis ball wouldn't hit the edges of the thing. And other people did different things that were interesting as well. And then, so what he did was he walked around the floor and he said, what's your solution? And so the people had to get up and they had to be critiqued about what their solution was. And he'd say, that's interesting, but that's really not the right answer. So he'd go to the next table and he'd say, what's your solution? Well, I don't think anybody got the solution right. And so he went up to the front of the room and he put the piece of paper on his desk and he tapped the ball and it went right through without touching the edges. And he said, now that you know the concept, I'm going to show you the formula for this. So then he put the formula up on the board about a straight line through a curve, and it worked, okay? And I'll never forget that. I can't tell you what the equation was of the formula anymore, but I do know that there is an equation and a formula that would work in that situation. That's how he teaches his physics class now. The class starts out with an activity, and then what happens is he talks about the facts and the equations and all those things later. He said ever since he's been doing that, he's never had a sleeping student, he's never had newspaper readers, and he said everybody's engaged, and he feels, he was certain, he had the raw data that all the grades really went up, and he was so much more successful. So, you know, he went successfully from a sage to a guide. And I wanted to share that little story with you. Okay, the goals of the, some more goals of the flip model. Focus on understanding and application more than recall facts, while not sacrificing the factual base, because I'm gonna transfer my class to you, and I want to make sure that the students do have a factual base when they move on. Provide students with more control over their own learning. Give students greater sense of their own responsibility for learning, and provide students with more opportunities to learn from their peers. Those were the things that were originally in my 4 categories, right? So these are the goals of the classroom flip model. Okay, so what are we flipping here? What does this classroom flip mean? The model seeks to accomplish the goals by flipping what's traditionally been done in and outside of the classroom. Deliver rote lecture content online for students to study outside of the class, and use the time opened up in the classroom for learning-based activities. Remember, this is what Wes did for his class. He gave his class away. He gave all the content to the students. Then he started to do active learning things in the class. He taught visual design, which is interesting because I think, how did he teach visual design, you know, in a rote fashion? That must have been very difficult for him. Okay, so here's sort of a graphic of the model. Move the lecture material out of the classroom through online delivery. I think this is going to work great for 2 things. One, traditional class, and it would also work pretty nicely for hybrid learning. I know some of you teach hybrid classes. Move homework into the classroom where the instructor can serve as the guide. Use the open up time for discussion and practice, and extend conversation outside of class through threaded discussion. So that's basically the model. I want to say a little bit about this moving the homework into the class. As Wes and I, or we separately used to travel around the country and give this seminar, I really liked the times when the students and the professors were together. Many times what you would find out would be that the perspectives were really different. And you got the students and the professors to talk together and to sort of reconcile what those perspectives was. But in every instance, what I would do is I would ask the students, do you need more help with the content or do you need help with the homework? And I want to tell you that they said the same thing every time. They said, I need help with the homework. I can read, you give me the PowerPoints, you give me the lecture notes, and I do pretty well with that. But what really bothers me is I'm frustrated. I'm in my dorm room, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I cannot solve the problem. And I said, well, why don't you review that with your professor at the next class? And they said, well, only certain problems get solved. Only certain questions get answered because the professor is interested in covering the content. We get back to that. So if I don't get my hand up fast enough, he answers somebody else's question and he goes on. So students feel that they need more help with the homework, and I think that this has a lot to do with that active learning strategy. Okay, so I'm going to tell you how to do this. I'm going to tell you how to use the classroom flip model. First of all, you need to determine a goal you'd like to achieve in your teaching or in your students' learning. That's the first step. Then you need to develop an instructional strategy to accomplish that goal, and then select an element of a CMS that can be used for the strategy. I'm a little old school here, so I didn't change this to LMS. Now CMS means content management system. It used to mean course management system, so excuse that. What I mean is I mean applications like Blackboard, Moodle, those sorts of things. Why use those things? Because that's the #1 academic technology that we provide for faculty, and just about every faculty has access to this. And it can be used effectively in this model, and you'll see how you can do that when I give you specific examples in a little bit. All right, then identify the skills in the use of a CMS or an LMS that you need to develop in order to implement the strategy. So that's the strategy, that's how it works. Okay? So, I'll give you some examples. Okay. Basic schematic. Identify the needs. What instructional strategies do I need? What things do I need to learn from the CMS, LMS to be able to do it? Okay. So I have these by category. Remember the 4 categories I gave at the beginning. The first category is student motivation. I need to capture the interest of my students, and I want the students to have greater sense of control over their own learning. So that's the need. What strategy could I use to meet that need? Provide rich environment in which students can pursue their own interests. I know that that's a lot easier said than done, but you guys are really good at that because you know the stuff that's out there and you know the stuff that you can provide to the students. Extensive online material and course content, including resource material and links to resources that students would follow if interested. Now, we're not going to cover 100% of the students because some students aren't going to do it. This is also an interesting aside. And I found this out being assessment specialist here at Case over the last 2 years. And I don't know why this is, and maybe you have some experiences with this. Students that I call high-functioning students, they will use any technology or any resources that you give them to move from a B to an A or an A to an A+. And low-functioning students, the ones that are D or below, are not likely to use the technologies or are not likely to use the resources that you give them. I was talking to a faculty member at Tri-C the beginning of this week, and he said, he teaches logic, and he said, well, that's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. He says, what comes first, that they're not using the resources or that they're a low-functioning student? And I said, I'm never getting in an argument with a logic guy ever again, because I didn't know how to answer the question. So, okay? Here's another example of student motivation. My students aren't prepared for class discussion because they haven't kept up with the reading, and a couple people said that. Remember I told you I'd give you the solution to the problem? It's a technology solution. All right? Use pre-tests over the text readings. And then encourage engagement of those readings in discussion boards, okay, in your LMS system. Most LMS systems have the capability to provide quizzes to students that you can have open to the students clear up until the time that your class starts. And if you do this, and if you have to make it meaningful, so you have to give them credit for taking these quizzes before they come to class. First of all, you're going to know every student that's done the reading. You're going to know every student that has not done the reading. They get credit for it. And in our experience, my experience and Wes Baker's experience, you start to do this, and the students start to get in the habit of doing the readings. So there's one solution that you could use. And like I said, in our experience, it's worked. Okay? New instructional approaches. Okay? Need. I'd like to reduce the amount of time spent on lecturing without sacrificing content coverage. This one's sort of a no-brainer because what you're going to do here is you're going to take that content, as I've been saying, is you're going to put it online for students. So you're going to give them your lecture notes. You're going to give them your PowerPoints. Some faculty here at Case, they've been using Media Vision courseware for a long time. They've actually captured their lectures. And they're putting those up. And that was this group that I talked to before I left. And they said, I have all my lectures on courseware already. You know, why do I have to do them again? So they're making those lectures available to the students. And then that opens up time in the classroom to do other things, to do more active learning. That's just starting here. So it'd be interesting to find out how they continue with that strategy. Okay, so you can create web pages. You can give them the you can give them the PowerPoints. You can have learning objects. Learning objects are reusable digital media that can be put together in different ways for faculty to proceed. Okay, unique instructional capabilities. The need. My students need to be able to assess their understanding of the content. Again, with the assessment functions within your CMS LMS, you can do that. You can provide students with almost 24/7 feedback. And it doesn't take long to create 3 or 4 question assessment, just so they know where they are. That's what they want, is they want feedback. How am I doing? So you could do that within your LMS and meet that need. I'd like to provide students with more immediate feedback. Again, it's the same thing. Or built into Blackboard. I don't know if there's a similar application within Moodle or some of the other LMSs, but you have an assignment manager which allows students to submit their papers, be graded by the professor, and then sent back to them. It's a pretty organized process, that's a feature that would permit you to do to meet the need that you have. My students need opportunities for continuing discussion for peer learning, and I want my students with to have more opportunities for peer learning. I'm mentioning the CMS LMS sort of thing because there are discussion boards in there. We have other technologies that we can use now. One would be Adobe Connect. You can give students access to Adobe Connect. There are open source things like DimDim that give the students the ability to video conference with one another and do those things. So remember, what you want them to do with this is you want them to continue the discussion outside of the class. Because you've done the active learning in the class, it's not like they're not doing discussion in class, but you want to get this engagement thing going where they're continuing that outside of class. I'd like to move from receptive learning, the lecture, the passive sort of thing, to discovery-based learning. And I'd like to help my students focus more on understanding and application rather than is this on the test sort of thing. Okay? Active learning strategies in class. We move the content out and provide the opportunity for 100% participation in discussion. That's one great thing about a discussion board is you can get 100% discussion because you make it meaningful, because you give them points, you give them instructions about what is an appropriate submission to the discussion board. I don't know what the last statistic was, but probably it's very similar. About 5 to 7% of your class respond in class. But if you make this a requirement that you must respond in the discussion board, you can get 100% discussion. A story that we have about using discussion outside of the class is this. Wes had a student in his class, and he felt that she was the lowest functioning student that was in there. And so that's when he started to initiate the discussion board in class. He found out from reading her threads that she was actually the highest functioning student in his class. So next time she came into the class, he said, "What's wrong?" He said, "You really had me fooled." And she said, "I have 2 problems." She said, "Number 1, I'm an introvert, so I don't talk in class." And she said, "Number 2, I'm a perfectionist, and I don't like to blurt out answers. I like to wordcraft my answers. And when you opened up the discussion board, you gave me a chance to do that." What happened to her actually was once the students saw what her capabilities were in the discussion board, they started to go to her for help, whereas before she was sort of lost. So I mean, this will have the effect of bringing some of those students out that don't respond in class. Okay, and I think we're going to move on a little bit. One thing is, so go back and look at your needs and see if you can develop a strategy, and then think about how you can use your CMS and LMS to do that. That's basically what the model is. So remember, as much as possible, you can move the content out of the classroom, use more activity-based things in the classroom. And one thing most faculty need is they need their professional development plan, or they need something to do over the year. So maybe that's something you could do to meet that. And I think I have a few minutes for questions. I'm getting the signals from back there. So does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm in a K-12 school administrator. I'm also a doctoral candidate at Mace.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, you know, with this kind of approach, what the time management issues are. If you take a 3-hour lecture, in higher ed in particular, and you're putting it on video and then requiring out-of-course discussion so that you have more active involvement in the classroom, I think in theory it's great, but time management-wise, I wonder about the level of stress that that would place on a student if they have 4 professors all doing the same thing.
Sometimes it's just not on the students. Sometimes it's on the professor, because students expect that if they post things on a discussion board or they send you an email that you're going to give them an immediate answer. So you have to manage that part of it, and you have to say, I'm going to collect these questions and I'll answer at once and do those sorts of things. I think students enjoy this approach more than the other approach, so maybe they'll adapt, but I think that's a good question. Some students don't like this approach. Some students want to go to class, sit down, listen to the lecture, take the test, and forget about the course after they've taken the final test, never to be thought of again. So it depends on the individual student, and I think a lot of it depends on this motivational factor, which again is my bias. So. Yeah.
How does this work when it's... Thank you. How does this work when it's only an online environment?
Well, I said it would probably work under 2 situations, either hybrid or traditional classroom. I don't, yeah, because there is no in-class component for totally online. So probably it's not that appropriate for that, yeah.
Okay.
And it's not, and this wasn't intended to cover that area. Yeah.
Model for many years.
I don't think that's on.
I've been,
No, we're recording.
oh, I've been using the flip model for many years in terms of active learning, and recently, I'd say in the last 4 years, using Blackboard platform to be able to push the lecture out to the Blackboard and finding a much more interactive environment for the students in terms of those who enjoy that kind of environment and who that motivates. But there still remains the question of being able to assist the students and being able to come to class, being prepared. And it does put more of a stress on the students a lot of times. It's been my experience that the students feel yet more responsibility when they don't want that responsibility, or they can't seem to fit it into their day, or they don't have the immediate resources available. So coming to campus becomes more critical for some of them. So it's a tender balance to walk between how much you expect outside of class, but as a positive result, one of the things that I've seen in the totally online classes, as well as the hybrid, as well as the on-campus, is that the discussion boards are just valuable. Students open up and share so much more than they would ever share in class. And using groups on the discussion board, students do a lot of collaborating together. But it still remains a big time issue for management, for faculty, to be able to assist in this high level of interaction outside on the discussion boards and in general. But it's a very good model.
Good. Other questions?
I have just a brief comment. Thank you. I think that one of the things that maybe can address the time issue, because it definitely is more time outside of class, is the choice of those instructional materials. Just because you have a lecture capture and a textbook doesn't mean you have to use both for every chapter. You know, I think probably as faculty use or adopt this more, it'll be more of a an instance of choice. Like, let's pick the best resource for that, or let's pick the best, you know, because the time issue is huge, especially outside of class.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? No? No?
Just one other comment.
One more.
Pearson Higher Ed has wonderful labs that go with most disciplines, and we have found them to be extremely helpful in terms of being able to determine what kind of resources to use, and it just makes it so easy for the students to access. So that's one thing that's very helpful. It cuts down on the time that the professor has to give to designing assignments.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to say that my PowerPoint will be on the CollabTech site. We're being asked to put our resources up there, so if you want the PowerPoint, you can, you know, after today, it should be up there. They're making me put it on this computer, which I really agree with, because we should be green and we shouldn't be giving everybody paper. So that's nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.